Welcome back. Did everybody have a cupcake? Yeah, exactly. I think I've got half of it down me, so they're absolutely great. So, my goodness, this morning, I mean, we had the conversations in the break time, just kind of trying to process really the results and the depth of the study. I think it's been really, really interesting. We're going to talk about why we need biophilia in the workplaces, which is what sort of Derek was talking about at the beginning, you know, this kind of the flourish model, and we were talking about the sparkle just now. I don't know your name. What's your name? Eleanor. So we just just now. But maybe we could kind of kick off a little bit. It's kind of an open floor as well. So if you have any questions as we're discussing, just chip in, raise your hand. I'll keep my eyeball on you. So if you have got something, it's just really informal. But maybe we could just sort of start by from the experts' perspective, why we need biophilia in the workplace, particularly. I don't know. Does anybody, Derek? Would you like to kind of maybe kick off as a kind of top line?
Well, biophilia and our connection with nature, let's say, affects people, it affects climate change, and it affects biodiversity. And all of those three things, as architects and designers, we're actually involved with. We're concentrating on the one about the people, because when you're doing work, you need to think. Your consciousness needs to be alert, attention. And to do that, you need this, what I keep saying, multi-sensory experience, not just on one thing or another, but it's a collection of things that focuses the mind. And when you're doing your work, you don't want distraction, but you want breaks. Breaks in the work are really valuable. And we're learning a lot more now that these breaks can take various forms. It might be a walk, it might be you see more offices having roof gardens. It may be still inside the building, maybe going into a room to listen to music or reading. It's a lot of different things. But obviously biophilia is a natural one because often, especially with roof gardens and spaces around the building, it's fresh air as well. It's not just that. And it also affects, the biophilia affects the patterns of light. And the patterns of light in places affect. Most of the research that comes back from evaluating buildings, the advantages, floods of daylight, airiness in the space, spaciousness, these sorts of descriptions. And when you analyse those words, there's many layers to them. But nature is part of that. Now, the other part I should say is that in engineering and architecture now, if you look at the research councils and bodies like the World Green Building Council and so on, they're talking a lot about nature-based solutions, NBS. And that is recognised now as an important vocabulary, important concept, which is being built into engineering, design, as well as biological design or architectural design. So it's slowly spreading its wings. And if anything in the environment helps you to concentrate and focus more, that's going to affect productivity. I say health and well-being are the roots of productivity. Mm-hmm. And as you can see from the work from Joyce and myself and so on, that these things are measurable because they weren't perceived as being measurable at one time, but now they are becoming measurable. We're beginning to understand how we as human beings think, work. Consciousness is still a bit of an open book, but the neuroscience, for example, is showing us how the brain works. We can actually picture that when you're doing different tasks. So there's a lot of understanding. We've got a lot to learn, a lot of questions to talk about, but we're moving in the right direction. So biophilia is this connection with nature. I mean, it's embedded, it's the harvest and hunter-gatherer theory. We've only actually been away from nature for the last 200 or 300 years. Before that, you naturally were in the countryside as agrarian. And since the Industrial Revolution, we've tended to neglect it somewhat. And now we're realising that's not a good thing to do. We need to be with nature.
Yeah, it's true, because we, you think about modern buildings since the Industrial Revolution. We're saying again in the break, we put everybody in like white boxes and think, oh yeah, great, now we want you to produce and we want you to work and we want you to deliver us loads of money. But actually, our brains are still going, I want a plant, I want some air, I want some light, and I want better sound. It's too noisy in here, it's too loud, everything's reflective. There's lots of whiteness around us. So we do need, we fundamentally, as human beings, as we are part of nature, we are nature, we kind of talk about that as something else, and nature-based solutions, it should be, us-based solutions, we are nature, we sort of need to kind of like join these things up. Joyce, for you, what's
Well, I think it's also the changing nature of workplace, if I am, picking a building type, that a lot of organizations are not going back full-time. I know quite a few choose to go back, like PLP if you're in the team base. But for future officers, hybrid working is going to stay. So workplace is actually a social space. And if we do, want to make people sociable, getting together, biophilia is a concept that can help to bring people together.
Absolutely, yeah, it's really, really lovely. You think about, I do quite a lot of work in Africa, and they have these spaces under the tree where everybody goes and sits and they talk, and the eldest sort of shares ideas and concepts. And we haven't moved that far really from wanting to sit and talk and share ideas and inspiration and creativity, and it's like the future of the workplace. Everybody went home and working from home during COVID, and now everybody's going, oh, I've got all this real estate, no one's coming back, it's costing me a fortune. So creating spaces where it's a destination, where people can come back and want to come back, we feel happy in, which is what you were saying about this, this fundamental comfort.
Very much links with, schools, outdoor learning, hospital, a lot of research to show that if you have herbal garden around and patients are able to walk around, the recovery rate is so much higher. So it really can apply to any types of building.
Yeah, absolutely. And Savannah, for you, what's important to you?
Well, just reflecting on what you've all said, like having gone through this research process on biophilic design, having done other projects related to neuroarchitecture and emotional design, it really just sticks out to me as you're talking that our brains evolved in nature, and therefore it makes sense that we are more productive, we think better, we are more emotionally, mentally regulated in nature. And that just becomes a no-brainer for me. Lovely.
I was going to ask you, you mentioned the sort of micro breaks, and there's obviously one of the patterns of biophilic design is fractals, isn't it? And that's sort of like, and if you, well, just because we've just been surrounded by, what's the name of this plant? What's this one?
That's a Stromanthe.
A what?
A Stromanthe.
You heard it here. Okay, Stromanthe.
Do you want it spelled? I'm just before I talk about fractals, and I'm going to ask this thing, but Adrian, when you're doing installations for clients, like here is just so beautiful. It's so, I just like, I do want to live here too. I kind of just want to take all these home with me. Are you conscious about the patterns that you use and where they're going to be? And, can you tell me a little bit about your kind of like the design side of things? So I think that's one of the really important things is nature is very varied in itself. So all the time we're working with nature, we're working with, if you like, what's already there. And the skill of being able to bring together different things that work well together. So, obviously you use different textures, shapes, contrasting. This is kind of like a matte finish to a more glossy finish, and different colours and things like that can actually just make something just live. But then there's also the whole, there's the aspect of maybe what materials you use. So the example we have there with, you've got these different types of materials we use for the containers and so on. All these things are actually all part of making that feel right, look right, and it builds that connection. So I think what you're saying is using these different aspects is really important to create that kind of, so it feels right, because a lot of it, as we've said, is the emotional aspect is so much to do with it. And if it just feels right, if it looks nice, really, really important. And I know we talked before one time about, if you've got a plant in a room and it's nice and lush and healthy, it actually gives off really positive vibes in that room. The converse side is, if that plant starts to kind of die off and look a bit sad and wilted, it actually has a negative impact in that space, which is kind of one of the reasons why we talk about the maintenance aspect of what we provide, is that if it's so key that the planting always looks nice, because if it doesn't look nice, you'd actually be better to have it not there at all. Yeah.
So it needs, we need life around us.
Yeah, we do.
So biophilia,
Yeah.
we need living plants.
Yeah.
Not raw plants, yeah.
And I think just jumping back to the comment, I think we were talking earlier about the whole aspect of biophilic design and how it can actually affect our how we are as people. That actually has the impact on the wider sphere. So, the impact potentially on reduced impact on the NHS because people feel better, more healthy, less mental health issues, all that sort of thing. Yeah, actually, the whole picture is huge, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. Like you say, in the research in healthcare, it's the reason I set up the whole thing and started researching into biophilic design, because I witnessed firsthand the difference a view of nature had on a family member in the NHS, and I'm like, okay, there's something in this. What is this? So I went off nerd brain, went off to research it, and that's why I've started the Journal of Biophilic, because I want more people to learn about it. And it's like, through this, I'm just been so privileged to meet people who are just doing this fundamental grassroots research, which is proving the thing that we kind of, it's weird, isn't it? We gut feeling, we know that being around nature and plants and things are good for us. And we know that when we go on holiday, we want the view of the sea. We don't want the one where it's looking at the dustbins at the back, do we? But then we build an office where we're looking at the dustbins, and we put the, people in hospital where they're looking at a wall, and face palm. But really, maybe we can kind of just circle back on the fractal thing. Maybe you could sort of tell me a little bit about how that works for us.
The thing about fractals, well, let's start with plants again, or trees, or nature, is curves. And in a lot of architecture, often the straight lines, but in some of the historic, if you look in Islamic architecture and other forms of architecture, people do appreciate curves and curved internal space as well. Plants naturally have lots of very varying shapes. Now, not only that, with the fractal scientists discovered the link with beauty, that if you take microscopic images of plants or buildings for that matter, the further you go down, you see curves, varying structures inside. And it's as though there's like a hidden aesthetic, which we sense, but don't actually see with the eye. We see the overall scale that we can't see. But we also seem to sense it inside. I've done experiments where they've compared different scaling ratios of things. And sure enough, there's a scaling ratio about 1.3, or I can't remember now exactly, where most people were consistent in their judgments of beauty. So plants and biophilia generally, that look at over there, the irregular shapes. There's some curvature, there's some points, and that. But you take that leaf and put it under a microscope and go down, and you'll find a lot more curvatures going on inside. And somehow, it's a bit of a mystery, really. We sense that, even though you can't actually see it with our eyes. But remember, all our senses are quite limited. Our smell, for example. A dog obviously has a much greater smell range than we do. And it's the same with the eyes as well. So we have certain ranges of operation. But the microscopic level is where the fractal patterns come in. And it's wonderful that you have this nature's fractal patterns are there. And somehow we sense them in our judgments.
Beautiful, isn't it, really? There's also creating those micro breaks as well, because I was just thinking there's like the patterns on the leaves and the sort of the it's like meditation almost, isn't it? It gives our brains. You talk about micro breaks. It does. If we've got a plant on our desk, particularly if it's close to us, we can just take that moment and just look at the leaf, and we might not even be conscious of it, but it is just giving our brains, like you said, Derek, about connecting the brain almost, the left and the right side.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we if you only concentrate and use one side of your brain, the brain sort of complains, kind of, sort of. I want to have a go as well, and the joining part is the callosum, connecting the two parts of the brain. And this work, when you're doing left-hand side stuff, which probably a lot of us do, the right-hand side comes into play. There's the other thing is about eye muscles. That's another thing. Obviously, when you're working at close quarters, your muscles are tight and can be tiring. And obviously, when you look you're far out, the eye muscles relax. So there's that aspect as well. There's another thing. But as I said earlier, the neuroscience that we have now, we can see results which are applicable to us as designers, begin to understand more deeply. We had a very shallow understanding of how the environment affects us until now. It's much deeper now. Long way to go. So I'm not saying it's complete, but
If you look at a group called the Good Light Group,
yes,
they have a very good rule. It's called 20-22.
yes,
So every 20 minutes, you need to look away from your screen,
yes,
and for 20 seconds, look at a plant,
Yeah.
look at a view,
Yep.
and take your eye away from the screen.
yeah,
And you should spend 2 hours every day in daylight.
yeah.
But they have loads of really good research and
Yeah.
really great information. It's called the Good Light Group.
Yeah, I've heard of that rule.
Yeah.
I've forgotten it, but I heard it. That's good. Yeah.
But I was just going to talk about the light thing, because we did a podcast, Adrian and I. He was my first podcast person about 3 years ago, but we did one just a few months ago talking about this research. But we were talking about plants, and it's like you can't put a plant in the dark room. You can't put it in the dark, and then we put people in the dark. We don't put people. We kind of go, oh no, we can't put the plants inside, but you've got to put them in the window. So duh.
It's really interesting just listening to all this chat and all the research that's coming through, which is awesome. I'm super inspired. I wish I'd done environmental design now, not what I'm doing. But I think if you were to ask a client, and let's face it, it's clients we're talking to, because that's where we're going to get the revenues from. But I think if you ask a client who was out walking the dog or something like that, everybody understands that walking in nature is far more beneficial for us all. Everybody understands, because we all talk about it, that my Villian plant is good, and go to the beach, and you said it, don't stay at a blank wall, look at our view and all that stuff. We all kind of get that, and clients get that as well. So, but then translate that back into the workspace and try and have a proper conversation with them about then a money spend and a creation of a design. We've measured for ages about workspace. We've measured productivities, absenteeism and retention through furniture design and furniture layouts and spaces, and how humans use spaces. And plants are always kind of in the background. You mentioned earlier, research was never there before, but it's now starting to come through, which is excellent. So it's another dimension that we can talk to about all the different things, why clients, they want to keep their staff, they want this, X, Y, Z, Belfield is one of it. So it seems dead obvious when we're all talking here, why would a client not ever consider to have an element of this within their workspaces? So the challenges then sit with all of us to try and bring the education into the decision-making process and the stakeholders within businesses to understand that there's a key factor to, probably more so than furniture and activity and stuff like that, in terms of staff, retaining their staff, and the health and well-being of their staff, more so to prevent absenteeism and all that. So it's, I said a story downstairs, like what this all reminds me of is the Christmas tree thing for me. So I love Christmas. Put my stuff up in the lounge. The lounge is amazing. The house is fantastic. And you all get immersed into all this experience and emotion of Christmas. And your house is the same as it was before the Christmas tree went up. And then you take it all away, and you instantly have this sense of, and everything's flat, and everything's hell. My house is crap. What do I do? And it's just like, and it's crazy. It's just exactly how it was before. So it's almost like the reverse almost speaking to a client in that view, I like to talk to clients about analogies and things like that, and this happened and that happened. Turning it into that, you get that people that go, oh yeah, absolutely, well, there you go. So that kind of proves the point that we're trying to make.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Can I just quickly say that I think a lot of the problem is that workplace design doesn't align with workplace policies. So I think a lot of companies don't have within their HR or their duty of care to their employee a concern about the work environment. I think if they did, and you could tie the two together and educate people from a different level, we all talk from a designer's perspective, but businesses aren't thinking about that. They're thinking about turnover, duty of care.
You need HR to
You need
actually come to
HR.
the table.
Absolutely.
They're very rarely there.
I think if HR, and now they're all being trained much more as people, as people, but more about psychology in their training and understanding of behavioural science, they're very important to bring to the table in any workplace design discussion.
100%. And I think humans in every aspect give you cues for what they want in their workspace, because we all bring our own wee plant, put it on the desk, and we all kind of know. So I think humans very much give cues, pockets of the area of businesses. You can see where people are trying to adapt the workspace to suit what they need to do. If the workspace is not flexible enough, you can just from the workspace design as well as plant design. Humans are the key to everything. They tell you what they do unconsciously. They tell you what they need.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you watch it like an observation study of how people work during the day from 9 to 5.
Yeah. But then that comes down to your question, like, you know, what's our role as designers? You know, maybe we should be the driver of this. You know, maybe we should be the ones who are the activators and try and actually get the HR on board and things. But you know, the research that you've done is a great tool. I mean, Joyce, do you have any kind of like sort of suggestions on how we can kind of like pull together and convince businesses that we need biophilic design from all the research that you've done? I mean, there's lots there. But
Yeah, it's a lot, and that's actually the outcome, one of the outcomes from the research. I think activating designers, and this is exactly what this tool is about, is making sure that, well, it's really difficult to control what others think, isn't it? It's right, we should really bring HR, all the human-centric elements into the discussion. I think from our part is really going back to the design that we have done to understand the outcome. And as an industry, finding a way, a platform that we can share this knowledge. So the more we do that, the more consistently that we prove it with a value-based approach, that could potentially help decision making. So this is not a one-off process. We're trying out, you know, with all the complexity, the time and cost constraint, to what extent we can objectively measure. But I think the key thing is the communication. So part of the research is not just about gathering evidence, and now we've got loads of information, almost overloaded. How do we condense it in a way that help PLP and others to make the argument? And there's no one size fits all. It really depends on the dynamic of the organization, identifying the blockers, the gatekeepers, but then use the tool to empower people who are believers already, and hope that it can magnify this very proven concept, and yet it's still, you know, very much a debate in the early stage, rebirth stage 0. Our job is really delivering the design, but increasingly I think we need to set ourselves up to be helping the business case, get there early, educate our clients. So I think if we don't tackle it in the beginning, it is a very hard argument later on to deliver a meaningful biophilic design. It's a much deeper kind of question.
yeah, I'm going to come to you, Savannah, in a sec. Sorry, Derek. Yeah.
Oh, me, right. Yeah, just following on from that, I mean, I think one of the other problems is we're working with old economic models, and we really need to look at newer economic models. I'm thinking of, you probably heard of the donut economic model, possibly? Yeah, yes. You know, where the outskirt, you know, you've got health and well-being on one part, and you've got the climate change issues on the other part. In between, your economics cannot go outside those boundaries and neglect either one. And those are the sort of models we should be adopting. Now that requires then a little bit more pressure from governments and so on and local authorities to sort of take that view of things. And that's the only way I think we're going to then get it consistent. I mean, I'm horrified when I do manage to get a doctor's appointment to go into I don't know what it's like for all of you, but the one I have in London, they go in and this doctor is doing a highly skilled job. They're working for 8, 10, 12-hour shifts sometimes. She's got a fluorescent light, old out-of-date computer equipment, no colour of any, all bland stuff, you know. And I said to one or two of them, because you don't get the same doctor nowadays, you know, how do you manage working these long hours in this thing? It's absolute opposite of what we're all talking about here this morning. Complete opposite. And these people are, you know, doing long hours. And the same thing if you go in A&E. I went in once at a hospital, and this guy was been, again, 10, 12-hour shifts, working in a pokey little place with artificial light. He can't really afford to make a mistake. And I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, and it's the sound as well, isn't it? The cacophony.
Yes. So obviously, when those spaces were set up, there's no consideration of these things we're talking about this morning at all. Nothing.
No.
Never mind before you get to biophilia, even just other things, you know.
Oh. So just
on that point, you know, you talked earlier about this idea of a sparkle layer on your graph, which I found interesting, and about I often talk to clients about transient spaces and how, you know, you can do something quite strong and powerful in these spaces because you're not sitting there all day, you're maybe passing through, and those could be sort of novelty moments or moments of highlight or more powerful interior intention. But do you think there's value still in having those moments and not sitting immersed all day long in your environment? You can move away to those moments, and that could be something that could work in other environments for doctors or people in very, you know, operating theatres or A&Es. Can they go to other spaces and still gain value from visits to areas that might have more biophilia or different?
Well, I mean, the environmental psychology is showing, the work that I know is that, you know, diversity of experience, and the system gets bored quite quickly, the senses, and you need variety, you need diversity. There was an interesting thing about art on walls, art things moving around. There's a very good reference, Peter Barrett, P.S. Barrett, it's worth looking up. He did they was working in schools actually, and looking at Andrew because he's in schools. He was doing, he wasn't using wearables, he was just doing what Joyce has been doing, some of her work, asking around and taking interviews and so on, looking at people's reactions at a close quarters. And he really found this interest in diversity is so important, whether you move a space or within the space. Because the sensory system bores quite, if it stops on the same thing for a long time, it sort of gets fed up, starts complaining sort of thing, in kind of way. So I think you're right, absolutely right, you know, by having variety of where places can move. And it's also, the other factor is the importance of movement. I don't know, I didn't know this till comparatively recently. When you're sitting down, your glucose levels, you know what it is, but when you stand up, we know the energy level goes up, but did anyone know that the glucose level goes down? So actually your glucose levels are healthier. Now they're not saying you should stand up all the time, they're just saying you should mix active working. So again, we're seeing that, you know, glucose levels can be affected by posture. Now when you get motion, you start moving around, that's another value into it, which we're only just recognising, you know.
I'm just going to say, I'm going to ask Savannah in a second about PLP and kind of how they felt about, you know, bringing the plants in and stuff. But with biophilic design, I'm always intrigued by, you know, like the prospect and refuge and then intrigue and creating these walkthroughs and spaces so that, you know, you are walking around but you can't really see around the corner. That's really important. All these things that we had when, you know, again, we're sort of taking our lives on the planes, as it were. We're still the same kind of animal, basically, but being able to kind of go, oh, what's around there? So that intrigues us to get up. So, you know, ticking that health and well-being aspect to get people off their bums and then getting up and walking around, going to see their friends downstairs or going to have a meeting downstairs. But, you know, we can design that. We can do that with planting. We can create that with zones. We can create these places and, you know, creating... I mean, I was going to talk about acoustics, but we can maybe do that afterwards because I'm also conscious that lunch is downstairs. But, you know, plants also create those, you know, these improved acoustics. I mean, if you think about it here, I mean, the sound is brilliant. It's really, it's sort of like it's just, there's all the bouncing of the leaves. There's a word for it. There's a technical term, which I'm probably going to be correct. Which one? Reverberation. Yes, reverberation off the leaves. But it's absorbed, you know, because it all just bounces around and then gets sort of sucked into the plants. I mean, these, you know, these little creatures are like amazing things. So just one thing, I'm just going to ask Savannah. So when you obviously this whole research came to PLP. I mean, what was the reaction? Were people kind of like upbeat about it? You know, were they kind of going, oh, this is kind of intriguing? You know, what was, because obviously you were the client, so I'm just thinking about from our point of view, from a design point of view, what was from a, you know, what was the client's perspective on this?
And if I remember correctly, it was 80% of people preferred the immersive scenario.
Yeah.
It was by far the most popular. And then I believe it was 17% for typical and then like 2% baseline. No surprise there. So generally, office-wide, the immersive was the most popular. But then like once we decided that we were going to go with a plant scheme, looking at the research, there were questions like, how do we do this? Do we have more biophilic spaces in our meeting rooms or in our lobby? What does that look like in the desks? And like how do we strategically place biophilia around our office so that everyone benefits? So there are a lot of ongoing conversations about what that looks like, and they're still ongoing. So it's, I would say, generally very supportive, and we're figuring out the details.
Yeah, but again, that's lovely, isn't it? Because in a way, you know, nature does grow and change, and we do change, and our personalities change, and our teams change as well, don't we? We don't always get the same staff. We need different spaces and that. So that's all good and healthy. So you were going to ask a question.
Yeah, sorry, thanks, Vanessa. I was just going to ask about, because you were talking about, you know, that wall and, you know, it's beautiful, the patterns. Have you guys found any link, like with colleagues who maybe who maybe have neurodiverse like requirements? Because I know sometimes pattern walls, that kind of thing, can have an impact. Has there been any link?
That's not the focus of this research, but we have been, you know, looking at neurodiversity quite a bit in wider level. So all of the participants, as far as we know, have claimed that they have no neurodiverse issues. So the research here does not link to that specific question. But I just wanted to go back to your earlier question about transient spaces. So when we started the immersive design, we very much started with the room, and then we thought, well, actually it is also about the way how those participants approach the room as well, and then we kind of grow the plant a bit outside to give it the mysterious, to provide a name, so, you know, to call it something, so the participant kind of prepare for entering into something special. It is hard to prove the value of those spaces, and as designer, we love those transient spaces, you know, creating that kind of informal moment. There's a really good piece of research actually was done at the Francis Crick, where the building, the PLP and HOK did before. It has a huge atrium. In fact, I think 30% or maybe more of the building are transient spaces, including the lobby, and it's a space for, it's the biggest biometric research center. And what the researcher at UCL did is to basically put a tag in those scientists and then look at the way how they start to contact each other as a mean to see how to gather evidence of social interaction and who is talking to what and at which point of the building. And the result is just so interesting to look at the way how they design the corridor and how conversations start. And you know, it's something that I didn't imagine that we can measure, but yet it somehow proved the design create that creativity and, you know, informal social interaction, something we couldn't capture, but the value somehow is there.
It's interesting because you could have, you know, the immersive experience in that room, which felt, you know, quite filled with greenery. But if you scaled that to everybody's workplace across a whole floor plate to get that same reaction in the workplace, that would be a lot of greenery through most of the floor plate. So it's just about how would you have an ebb and flow of the intensity of that, but you could actually move, you could gravitate towards the area that you felt most comfortable, and it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have that full immersion through the whole space, which brings about costs and all sorts of other good things and maintenance, and you know, you that gets scaled up the more you have in the space. So it's just, presumably there is value in having variety.
Yeah, it goes back to that, and then it goes back to the concept of biophilia. How do you contextualize what is there? It's very specific, isn't it? So you need to look at the emotions that you want to create. It's not just about plugging in, you know, a bit of green washes. It's very much the design tactile
And all
into
of the materials as well.
how you
to
enter the
create,
building,
to
you know.
enhance.
Exactly.
It's what psychologists call contrast pattern recognition, and you need contrast pattern recognition, and you can achieve that in some of the ways we're talking about, which may involve biophilia or may not, because it applies to colours and all sorts of other things, shapes. But I do recommend, Miss Burns, Avon, and the lady at the front here, the work of Barrett, because it covers those issues which you're looking at. P.S. Barrett, if you get a job finding it, if you contact me, I'll send you some references. He's got some very interesting results from his surveys of spaces, and I'll let you know.
Going back to the point about the neurodiversity aspect, and is it? I don't know the answer to this, but is there a difference between the patterns and the colours and so on from nature compared to man-made things that could affect people in different ways? Nature itself is, as humans, we have this connection with nature, don't we?
Yeah, that's
So
an added value. That's
yeah.
good. So both of those things will do some positive things, but nature has that added thing of your inner connection, and that's an extra value, as it were.
I'm more thinking that the question about can having all these contrasting aspects of nature, can that have an effect on some people, the way they react to that space? And I'm just really asking the question as to whether actually, can you ever go wrong with nature, is probably my question.
I was just going to say, actually, because so I'm working with Dr. Sally Augustin, and we talk about, obviously from the environmental psychology point of view, sometimes having plants with too many different patterns and colours and things like that can overstimulate some people but every neurodiverse person is different as well, like we are all different, so there's not one size fit all. And I've done quite a few interviews actually with different people who specialise in autism, neurodiversity, Samantha Friedman, Karen McLennan, they're on our website, they're on Spotify and stuff like that, but they do talk about how we need to actually talk to people and say, do you like this? Does this space make you feel good? Because, we can go along, and it's also like, the sort of nature prescription. We can say to some people, oh, you need to be outside, you need to go outside, and this is great. Some people don't particularly want to do that because they might feel too alone, or they feel vulnerable. But then, but say 95% are cool with that. But it's like everything. Everybody has to be, you have to talk to people. It has to be people-centric. So.
Just go back to your point about can nature ever be wrong. There are carnivorous plants.
Yes, so don't be
and
a fly.
there are poisonous plants.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just go back to your point about context. When you did the research, did you measure any other factors in the room? So did you measure the temperature, the daylight, the light levels? That's all part of what you did. Okay.
Yeah, we haven't quite present the full research here. It's just quite a lot. I was trying to focus on that one point because I know that if you come here, you would probably believe in biophilia already. So the next question is what you were asking. So yes, we do. I think that is the complicated thing, isn't it? How do you prove the additional value that you're putting in, which means that you have to basically measure the ambient environment. You need to measure the basic kind of physical well-being. Then you can build on the bit which is in the top hierarchy, you know, the meaningful, the self-esteem, in a way that biophilia is looking at the top bit, providing that the basic comfort are all there to support the basic human function. So yes, we do measure that, and then we did ask people not to drink too many cups of coffee, so that it, you know, it really goes down to a lot of detail when you have to make a claim that is 13 times more. What does it mean? You know, how do you actually prove that? How do you show your claim that is factored out? You know, maybe it's not what you do, it's just, you know, that particular case. So it does have some technique to make sure that we ask the question, you know, how much of those that you feel are actually related to the space, the new space, the new intervention, and that is called the attribution as a technical term, which we didn't walk through. Yeah, I think that is the things that, you know, as a collective, we need to make sure that we have the complexity, but with the reality, you only have 10 minutes in that meeting to push this through. You know, how do you then bring that message back in a way that it helps? Yeah, so that's the challenge, a real challenge.
So thanks so much. So we're gonna break for lunch now. So obviously keep coming with the questions. This afternoon we're gonna kind of get practical. So we're gonna talk about how we can get this into our workplaces, you know, and we can really drill down. We can have discussions about how we do this, how we get this over the line, and we can ask our experts for things and as well. So yeah, I think that way for food. Thanks so much.